this may be the cheapest lens that I've ever featured on the channel. And I think a lot of people might hate this lens, but I also think there'll be another group of people, myself included, that will really like it, especially when you consider the price tag. So if you hate the look of the images you're seeing now, feel free to click away. Everyone else, if not, stick around and let's get into it. This is the TT Artisan 40mm f2.0, tiny little lens, and I've been testing it out on both my Nikon ZR and my LUMIX S1 Mark II, and also my LUMIX S1R Mark II. It retails at around $170, and for that price you'd be forgiven in thinking that it might be a plasticky piece of trash, but it's not. It's tiny, it's surprisingly sturdy, it's autofocus, but it also comes with a manual aperture ring. It's clicked, it's not declicked, and it's also electronically controlled, so it's not a mechanical aperture ring, but it's really nice to see a feature like this in this tiny lens at this price point. And I generally just love the look of a 40mm. In fact, I think it's one of my favorite focal lengths. You know, you're getting that wideness that you get with a 35 with just a little bit more compression as you go towards that 50mm lens. And on most projects these days, I tend to shoot all interviews with a 40mm now. I took it out on my little Nikon ZR over Christmas, and because of the size of this package and the fact that it has autofocus, it encouraged me to do something that I never do, and that's shoot with a gimbal. So I dusted off my little RS3 Mini and chucked the Nikon ZR on with a 40mm and had a little play around, and just absolutely loved the results that I was able to get. Being able to shoot on this tiny form factor with autofocus on a tiny gimbal that fits in a backpack is kind of a bit of a revelation for me, like about what's possible with today's camera equipment. In fact, they're some of the nicest images I think I've got to date on the Nikon ZR. The lens has some really nice character. It definitely pushes more in towards that kind of like vintage camp, and I think a lot of TT Artisan lenses maybe do that. It's not wild or anything, like it does lack a bit of contrast wide open at f2, maybe it's a little bit more bloomy, but if you stop it down to t2.8 then it tidies up pretty quickly and pretty well. It's obviously not the sharpest lens, but if you're interested in shooting portraits and people, I think it's fantastic. And you know, if that's what you're doing, you don't really want a razor sharp clinical lens. So I found myself mostly shooting with this between f2.8 and f4, mostly video obviously. I didn't shoot a lot of stills with this. One of the things I absolutely love about this lens is the physical aperture wheel. One of the things I hate with using electronic lenses and modern lenses is the fact that you've got to sort of interact with a dial somewhere on a camera to change the aperture, and that often pulls you out of the moment. It pulls you out of monitoring your image, whereas with my cine lenses, with mechanical aperture control, you just have to slide your finger along that wheel to change the aperture. Now on this lens, it is clicked, it's not declicked, so the aperture will still be stepped and change in increments rather than the sort of gradual transition you'll get on your classic cine glass. But it also has autofocus, and the autofocus is good. Like, I expected it to be terrible and for it to sort of ruin a bunch of shots, but it didn't. It isn't as snappy and as fast as maybe like the more expensive native lenses that you might have on your system, but it was definitely fast enough to keep up. I guess occasionally it took a little bit longer to acquire focus on eyes, which I noticed only when I was shooting in like slow motion or in super slow motion, but once it had locked and acquired focus, it generally kept up really well. Given that on the Nikon ZR, I was shooting on a gimbal, I was also shooting in 50 and 120 frames a second, and I didn't really notice any pulsing or falling out of focus. The worst it did was maybe in the slower frame rates was maybe just took a little bit longer to lock onto eyes and stuff like that, but nothing that would ruin your images. And the fact that you get this interesting vintage-esque look and character with a lens, but benefit from the automation of having autofocus on it is just such a lovely package. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds with this lens. And I think the only other thing I really noticed was maybe on my Lumix copy, the autofocus motor was a little bit noisier than sort of native lenses. But again, you know, I'm splitting hairs here. It's nothing that would distract or get in the way on an average shoot. I think probably the only place where I would mark this camera down is the quality of the bokeh. I mean, it's fine, it looks nice, but it is sometimes maybe like a little bit hexagonal. Close focus for a lens of this price point is pretty good. It's not going to win any awards, and you're not going to be getting any sort of macro capabilities, but for the sort of work that you're likely to be capturing on a focal length like this, it's more than adequate. Same goes for chromatic aberration. Like, it's there, but again, compared to other lenses I've tested, it didn't seem particularly wild or intrusive. And I'm not really going to do any stress tests which would present the chromatic aberration in situations where I wouldn't really be shooting. So if you can't notice it, or you're not bothered by it, by what you're seeing in these images, then I think that's all you need to know. Okay, let's look at some controlled tests now. So here we are on the LUMIX S1R Mark II. We're wide open at f2 on the TT Artisan 40mm. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of highlight blooming around the light sources, and also a bit of vignetting and loss of contrast and saturation when we are wide open. And if we quickly cycle between f2 to 2.8 to f4, you can really see how the lens characteristics change as we stop it down. Notice how the center and the vignetting tidies up. As we go to f4, I think we get optimal contrast and sharpness, and the ghosting and blooming around the light sources is pretty much gone by this point. You can see even wide open at f2 that chromatic aberration is pretty well controlled. You would generally expect to see this around the backlight here, and as you can see, there's not a lot going on. Here is the 35mm Lumix S lens at f2, maybe a slight magenta or warm bias in the TT Artisan. If you look at the white door in the background, it's a lot more neutral on the Lumix. And you can see a bit more detail going on in the eyes on the Lumix lens. Here we are with the Lumix S24-60 at 40mm at f2.8. The colours are quite different here. Look at the density and saturation of the red jumper, which is just a little bit more richer on the Lumix lens. However, sharpness on the TT Artisan actually looks better at f2.8 than the zoom lens. If you look at the jumper texture, you can see the difference here, and even at f4 it's slightly better, but it is obviously a prime versus a zoom lens, so you would expect something like this. And you can also see just how well chromatic aberration is controlled in the TT Artisan lens relative to the Lumix lenses. And here you can see a little flare test between the three lenses. And finally, here are some side-by-side color chart comparisons. I thought it'd be fun to give you a very quick comparison between the Nikon ZR and the Lumix S1R Mark II. I think both cameras look stunning. The S1R Mark II has always pushed a little bit more red and magenta and given a bit more density to reds. But just so you can see, here's the log, the standard camera brand Rec 709, and then my LUT. The Hackney LUT will be coming to red in Nikon soon. And let's quickly just look at the Nikkor Z 35mm f1.4 against the TT Artisan 40mm. As you can see, this lens is a lot more neutral, it's cooler, it's sharper, and in my opinion, it's just less interesting. I think I much prefer the quality of image from the TT Artisan lens. It's funny because I've been talking to a few people over the last few months who have been testing this lens, and it's clear that it has a bit of a Marmite effect. Some people love it, like me, and other people just don't get it. They don't like it, and that's fine. I don't think a piece of equipment, a lens, or a piece of art should always please 100% of people 100% of the time. This isn't a lens that is perfectly neutral and clean, it's doing something interesting. Some people will vibe with that and some people won't. There's no right or wrong here. And it's definitely going to depend on like what you shoot and how you shoot. You know, if you're shooting people and portraits and you don't necessarily want the sharpest, most neutral looking clinical lens, then there's a lot to like here, especially considering the price tag. It kind of makes it a bit of a no-brainer. Like, there's very little downside to this thing. On the other hand, there'll be a group of people that maybe shoot landscapes and buildings and architecture, and they need a sharper, more controlled lens, and that's fine, that makes sense. This lens maybe won't be the right choice for them. And there's plenty of other lenses out there that will tick those boxes, but probably not at this price point. This is definitely one of those lenses that encourages me to pick up my camera and shoot with it. In fact, I think I captured more sample footage for this video than I would usually do for a video of this type. Other lenses I've used on these small mirrorless cameras, like the Lumix S lenses, they're fine. They're just not the most interesting lenses. They don't excite me, and you know, they're made out of plastic and they're much more expensive as well. I think if you own something like a Lumix S9, it's going to be a really nice little walkabout portrait lens for a small form factor camera like that. It fits perfectly on my little ZR and also even on my Lumix cameras as well. And I love using a lens like this on my Lumix bodies because, you know, those cameras do render a slightly cleaner, sharper image than some of the other cameras I use. So it just takes the edge off the image a little bit more. And with the Nikon ZR, I wish I'd known about this TT Artisan lens before I picked up that camera, because I wanted to pick up an autofocus lens with that camera. I went with the Nikkor Z 35mm f1.8, which is a nice lens. It's very sharp and clean, and it has maybe like a little bit of character to it, but it's more than 3 times the price. It's much larger, and I actually much prefer using this little TT Artisan lens. Like, it spent way more time on the camera than that 35mm has. So if you are buying a new camera and you are stretched on budget and you want to pick up an autofocus capable lens, then definitely look into this. There will be an affiliate link down below. Obviously, I make a small amount of commission from that, no extra cost to yourself. But that's it. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, just chuck them down in the comments down below. I'm Ed, and I'll see you next time. See ya.